everything is being watched. Obviously, disciplinary examples are something that everyone is afraid of. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And in terms of those detective controls, investigations, computer-assisted audit techniques. If anybody saw the movie The Accountant with Ben Affleck, he actually used some of those computer-assisted audit techniques, but just using his own brain. That's a neat little aside. I'm an accounting geek, so I like talking about that. So let's talk about the internal investigations themselves. Are these internal investigations internally performed, or are you using outside experts? It depends. If your client has a fairly robust internal audit program, internal audit department with investigators, and I mean real investigators, former law enforcement, who have the skill set, then yes, that is fairly well accepted by regulators. As we go through this part of the conversation, bear in mind, everything that I'm talking about will be presented from the perspective of there's already a regulatory investigation in the works, and you as the service provider to your client or as the corporate executive needs to adopt the mindset that everything is going to be looked at with the highest level of scrutiny, and this is a bet the company level investigation.
And so in those cases, the other things to consider is in terms of whether to do it internally or whether to bring in outside service providers, is that if you bring in a lawyer,
if you bring in an outside attorney, then you have to typically have outside special counsel appointed by a special committee to the audit committee or its equivalent, so that there is reporting at the appropriate level. And by using outside counsel, there's a degree of independence and being a fair and honest dealer here. Steve, are you coming through? I'll continue to run with this then.
hires those outside service providers, then all of this is.
Steve is just not having a good day internet connection wise. So when we have outside counsel hiring outside attorneys, outside investigators, outside forensic experts, because how much of our world is digital now? Seriously, I don't have to answer that. So by hiring outside counsel, who then hires these outside experts, there is a level of privilege that applies. So any information that's generated is not producible or discoverable until it is subpoenaed, which makes a huge difference for internal corroboration and collaboration. And here we go. No, go back here. Yes.
We're at 2:30.
We are.
I know okay. You've been thrown completely askew by this.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, guys.
What I'm going to ask is, if you could, David, I think you covered most of it. If you could, in a nutshell, sort of, and I know it's an 8-hour nutshell, right? But if you could, in a nutshell, wrap up what your point of view on this. And Steve, since you had a poor connection, maybe you could also wrap up in a nutshell what you think are the 3 most critical things. And again, we only have a couple minutes. 3 most critical things you wanted to address in this, and then we can open it up to questions.
Sure, David, thank you.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Steve, can you go?
Yeah, so look, I think that what we've tried to emphasize, and I'm sorry I haven't had this kind of problem at all in the past 3 months here, so I certainly apologize to everybody.
It's because you're wearing a tie.
Yes, which is also the first time in 3 months. I mean, look, what these guidelines help you think about is how to take potential wrongdoing seriously, whether that's wrongdoing that comes in through the whistleblower hotline at your office, whether it's wrongdoing you learn from a subpoena, the government suddenly asking questions, whether it's wrongdoing you learn through your compliance process. And so when you have that kind of wrongdoing, there's time limited in emergency activities that have to take place. You have to figure out whether that wrongdoing is real or whether it's just an allegation that can be dismissed. If it turns out to be real, you have to figure out how important it is to the organization, and you do that by investigating it and taking it seriously. You then determine whether you want to cooperate and send that information to the government and self-report, or whether that's something you choose not to do. And then you want to take other steps to make sure that you've acted as a good corporate citizen. You have to reprimand people who did the wrong things. That might be firing the bad guys. You want to change your policies so that you can point out that you won't let this happen again. You want to put your company in the best position so that in the future, if people come and look at what happened and what you did, that you're seen as the good corporate citizen and not someone who tried to put this under the carpet and pretend it didn't happen.
That's right. And if I had to add 3 points to Steve's 3 points, that would be recognize that in the event of an investigation, there are options, there are strategic decisions that have to be made in order to make the best informed decision. Bring in the best professional advice that you can, the attorneys, the accountants, the forensic accountants, the forensic data technicians, and look and proceed carefully with stakeholder value in mind to say, if we investigate ahead of the regulators, what benefit does that give us? Can we spin this, or do we just work as hard as possible to capture all of the information and basically wrap it up in a bow on a platter and present the good, the bad, and the ugly? That most likely will give you the best degree of leniency from a prosecutor, subject to a myriad other factors that Steve would be able to point out. And the other thing is, get ahead of this by being proactive with your policies and procedures, your record keeping, and your oversight practices. That would be my strongest takeaway to this. Interesting questions here. Is there a greater concern because so many more employees have, whoops, too many questions coming in. Because so many employees.
I'll go ahead and read them if you want.
Oh, thank you, Joe. Yes.
So do you have a greater concern because so many more employees have documents at home, i.e. the possibility of law enforcement shows up that documents that might otherwise go through company counsel might be disclosed? Should employees receive instructions in advance? So I'm guessing that's in the context of everybody keeping computers and documents at home. Is that correct, Kathy? Maybe you can phrase it.
My question was really, now that you have so many employees at home with their computers and their documents, you know, Steve's original scenario is agents show up at the door simultaneously to ask questions. You might have employees who have documents at home that they could show to, or unwittingly show to agents that they might not otherwise if it went through company counsel, and whether there should be instructions to employees in advance of that.
Oh, from my perspective, I think that's a great point, Kathy. You know, your company should have policies and procedures about working from home and how to protect information. So, for example, my law firm has policies that we are not allowed to print anything off that wouldn't be on through a company printer, for example. And so we can't produce client information essentially at home without going through a bunch of steps. So, but you're right, that creates a danger if you don't have those kind of procedures, if you don't have a locked system. And we've seen another thing, Kathy, that's similar, that's helpful to your practice, that the SEC's reported that with people working from home, whistleblower reports to their offices are up 35%. So people working from home are both a danger that the documents are not within the control of the company, but they're also not under the supervision more closely of their normal supervisors. And people may be taking that as an opportunity to pick up the phone and call someone such as the SEC or a helpline and let them know that there was wrongdoing going on at the company, which creates risks for the company.
Yes, I was actually wondering when you referred to documents, Kathy, what are those? Everything has gone digital now. This is the world that you know, our parents couldn't even imagine.
A lot of people have asked if you could share the deck. You know, obviously we had some technological difficulties. I'm just curious. We have, you know, of course, Kathy is the litigator on the phone. We have Greg Henning, and maybe Kathy and somebody else on the phone is also a former prosecutor. But Greg, do you have any questions that you'd like to throw in there?
No, I don't have any questions. I think the slide deck is really important, and obviously each situation is different. The federal system and the state system have some similarities, but these guys have federal experience, which is really important. I think on the stay-at-home and work-at-home situation, especially the opening description that they gave, that is going to be something we see over the next 6 to 12 months, that instead of corporate offices getting raided, there's going to be residential offices, which are just people's homes getting raided. So proactively, some of the clients that we have are thinking about using some resources that they would have put toward office space and using it for home security stuff that their own employees would have, updated computers and things like that. So the proactive steps, I think, are the most important part of the deck here.
Oh, one point that I forgot to make, we mentioned disciplinary actions, which should be contemplated in the code of conduct, in the behavioral guidelines that the company distributes on its website to all of its employees. I've always been a fan of public hangings, and by that I mean that the discipline should be swift, sure, and well thought out, and make it very public. So Steve and I, when we were preparing for this, we talked about the actions by Franklin Templeton Fund in connection with the Central Park Dog Walker event. That took a whopping 3 days to work it through, and the woman was removed from the company for acts that violated company guidelines. Straightforward, unambiguous, and well thought out. Their language, when they explained it, was to the point. It was, in my mind, textbook perfect.
Chris Hoffman has a question. Be interesting from the, I guess, is from the commercial insurance side of it. Chris.
Hello. Yes, my question is that with several insurances that can border on criminal acts and also, you know, breach of responsibility into either the fiduciary or to the directors of officers or employment practices, but also criminal or cyber even. Can you tell me about the role of the defense mechanism of an insurance policy and how the government plays with that or handles that? Now, I'm not sure how to phrase it clear. I know what I'm trying to get at. I'm not exactly sure how to say it. I apologize.
Well, policy might pay for defense, depending, as any insurance person would tell you, you have to read the policy first. But the policy would provide for the expenses. I don't know what else it could do with respect to addressing criminal charges. Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
Chris, go ahead.
Steve, I'm sorry. Let me clarify a bit more. What I'm aware of how the policy is going to react and how counsel and selecting from a panel and all that. What I'm questioning is, how does the government handle an insurance carrier getting in the middle of this? What's that dynamic like?
Usually, I don't see the government taking on the insurance company in these situations, or the insurance company getting in the middle. Usually, you have plenty of situations where the insurance carrier will advance the fees, and that can make a huge difference between a person having the ability to defend themselves and being able to fight the government and try to prove their innocence versus becoming broke trying to fight their case against the government. So the D&O insurance is absolutely essential. There have been cases where in the last 20 years where the government has tried to put pressure on companies perhaps not to fund an employee's legal defense when or a former employee's legal defense. And when the government gets involved in that, the courts have found that to not be playing fair, that the government should not be in the place of denying somebody their right to counsel. So if the company has a policy of paying for counsel, the government should not be interfering with that.
Perfect. I want to point out a point that Kathy D'Agostino made that about culture, and it seems that a foundational part of avoiding these issues that you brought up in the beginning is creating a culture, a book of ethics, a code of conduct and ethics that you have your clients sign, your employees sign annually to reaffirm their commitment to that same code. Is a fantastic suggestion. I'm going to ask Kathy, do you want to add to that?
No, I mentioned it the other day, just that, the Me Too movement, racist, all of these things and criminal activity, I think it's when companies really don't set these policies and speak about them and keep them top of mind. Oftentimes they're a plaque on the wall and people forget about them, but I think it's underestimated the weight that can carry when people really understand culture, the company culture, and culture, again, described as how we do things around here, even when no one's looking. So to me, that seems like it sets a foundation, and we could ward off a lot of these things. And again, really having these values that are constantly set to behaviors and holding people to the expectation that this is the way we behave, and then setting rewards and then putting it in their performance review. I just think that encompasses so much, and yet companies minimize it so often. So that's my thoughts.
Kathy, further to what you said, a definition for integrity or character is often explained as what people do when they think no one is watching. And if you can explain that in plain English with real life examples, that's a code of conduct that people can live with.
And Kathy, I would jump off to say two things. One is, you're right. If you can create that culture so that people aren't creating the bad acts in the first place, that's certainly number one. But number two, what we've seen is that companies who routinely and regularly train their employees on doing the right thing, on letting them know how they're supposed to act, on living that culture, when somebody does do the wrong thing anyway, that's a reason where the government's going to exercise discretion and not go after the company. So by teaching people to do the right thing in the first place, that can help the company if, despite all the efforts they make, somebody does something wrong.
Thank you very much. I agree, obviously, and I think companies minimize it, and I think that, to your point, it's just so valuable, and yet it doesn't seem like many companies take it too seriously.
So true.
Well, that's 2:45. Unless there's last burning question, what I'm going to recommend is clearly we had some technical difficulties in this. And what I'm going to recommend is that you reach out to either of the gentlemen that made this presentation. Both of their information is on the website. If you would go to the front page with your contact information of your presentation. But if we get past this,
oops, how's that?
Good enough, as long as it has your contact information. And anybody can reach out. These are fellow USA 500 members. And barring the technical difficulties, we know this was going to be fabulous information given. So thank you all. I'll leave this open for just a couple seconds. If anybody wants to stay on and ask any questions, you can unmute yourself at this point and just ask the questions. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you, guys. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Great questions, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. This really moved it forward.
Great job, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Rob, I will circle back with you.
All right. Sounds great. Take care. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kathy, for joining us.